The heat was a liar. It came off the baked Nevada dirt in shimmering waves, a visible distortion that made the air itself look corrupt. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, the target at 4,000 meters was a ghost, a suggestion of steel swimming in a mirage. Chief Petty Officer Cody Viper Evans let out half a breath, the reticle of the Ethelred X-11 rifle system settling just a hair to the left of the spectral plate. His heart rate was a steady 58 beats per minute. The wind, a fickle 7 miles per hour gusting to 9, was coming from 3 o'clock. The Kestrel 5700 weather meter fed the data directly to the rifle's integrated ballistic computer. The computer, in turn, told him to hold 1.2 mils left and 42.7 mils high. Cody trusted the math. He trusted the system. He was a Navy SEAL, a graduate of the most demanding sniper course on the planet. He'd made shots in conditions that would turn a civilian's blood to ice. This was a demonstration. A dog and pony show on a controlled range for a new piece of ordnance? It should have been simple. He pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, a clean, crisp impulse of managed violence. The recoil was negligible, absorbed by the advanced chassis. The report was a sharp crack that echoed once against the distant sun-bleached mountains before being swallowed by the vast, empty desert. The flight time of the .416 caliber solid brass projectile was over 7 seconds. An eternity. On the high-definition monitor next to his shooting mat, the image from the target cam remained unchanged. No impact, no puff of dust from a near miss, nothing. The spotter, another SEAL from his team, tapped his own scope. No splash, can't see where it went, lost it in the mirage. Beside them, a man named Brandt cleared his throat. Brandt was from the company that made the Ethelred. He wore a crisp logo-embroidered polo shirt that defied the 100-degree heat and a smile that seemed factory-installed. Atmospherics are tricky today, gentlemen. The density altitude is fluctuating. Let's run the numbers again. The system is perfect. The environment is the variable. Cody didn't reply. He worked the bolt, chambering another round that cost more than a decent bottle of scotch. The brass was cool against his fingers. He had been here for 3 hours. The demonstration was for a handful of procurement officers from SOCOM, men with blank faces and budgets that could alter the course of small wars. Brandt's company had promised them a weapon that could reliably engage targets beyond the effective range of anything currently in the inventory. A paradigm shift. So far, all they had demonstrated was the paradigm's stubborn refusal to budge. This was his third attempt. The first 2 shots had also vanished into the shimmering air. He could feel the impatience radiating from Brandt, a cloying transactional anxiety that had no place on a firing line. To Cody, this was a problem to be solved, a complex equation of physics and instinct. To Brandt, it was a sales pitch going south. Off to the side, away from the covered firing positions and the array of expensive technology, an old man sat on a dented igloo cooler. He wore a faded flannel shirt despite the heat, dusty jeans, and a pair of scuffed work boots that looked older than Cody. A greasy ball cap with the logo of a long-forgotten tractor company was pulled low over his eyes. He hadn't said a word all morning. He just sat there, nursing a beverage from a battered steel thermos, watching. He looked like a local farmer who had taken a wrong turn and decided to stay for the show. A piece of living scenery. Brandt had noticed him earlier, striding over with the practiced confidence of a man used to owning any room he entered. "Can I help you, Pop?" he'd asked, his voice a little too loud. The old man had looked up slowly. His eyes were pale blue, washed out by years of sun, and they took in Brandt with a disconcerting lack of reaction. Not curious, not intimidated, just present. "Just watching," he'd said. His voice was quiet, gravelly, like stones rolling in a slow creek. "This is a private demonstration. Invitation only," Brandt had pressed, puffing his chest out slightly. The old man took a slow sip from his thermos cup. "Got an invitation." He didn't elaborate. He didn't produce a piece of paper. He just stated it as a fact, leaving no room for argument. Brandt, flustered by the lack of expected deference, had simply grunted and walked away. Now, as Cody prepared for his 4th shot, he was peripherally aware of the old man again. The man had set his cup down and was looking not at the monitors or the shooters, but out at the desert itself. He seemed to be reading the landscape, his gaze drifting over the scrub brush and the subtle contours of the earth. Cody exhaled, settled the reticle, and fired. 7 seconds of silence. Nothing. "Damn it," Brandt muttered, his smile finally beginning to fray. He turned to one of the civilian engineers. "Is the laser rangefinder calibrated? Are we getting accurate readings?" The engineer, a nervous young man with a tablet, nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. 4,000 meters plus or minus a foot. The data is solid. It must be a wind shear we're not picking up." That's when the old man spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs of frustration with the clarity of a breaking twig in a silent forest. "The ground's thirsty." Everyone stopped. Brandt turned, an expression of disbelief on his face. "What did you say?" The old man didn't look at him. He was still watching the desert. "Said the ground's thirsty, it's pulling the air down. Your numbers are for flat air. The air out there ain't flat today." A few of the other shooters, corporate guys and ex-military contractors in matching tactical gear, snickered. Brandt's face flushed with anger. It was one thing for his multi-million-dollar rifle system to fail. It was another to be critiqued with what sounded like a line from a farmer's almanac. "Thirsty ground," Brandt repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. And I suppose the moon being in retrograde is affecting the spin drift. With all due respect, old-timer, we're dealing with advanced ballistics here, not planting corn. Why don't you just stick to your watching?" The old man gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug and went back to his thermos. He didn't defend his statement. He didn't argue. He simply let the dismissal hang in the air and then extinguished it with his own silence. But Cody had hurt him, and something about the quiet certainty in the man's voice registered in a place deeper than ballistic tables and computer readouts. He'd spent enough time in the wild, in places where survival depended on reading the subtle language of the environment, to know that there was a truth to the world that science couldn't always quantify. The ground's thirsty. It was a strange, poetic observation, but it felt more real than the flickering numbers on the engineer's tablet. He looked out at the mirage again, trying to see what the old man saw. He saw nothing but heat and distance. Brandt gestured to another shooter, a former Marine Scout sniper now on his company's payroll. "Jansen, you're up. Let's show them what the Ethelred can do." Jansen, a man built like a vending machine with a swagger to match, lay down behind the rifle. He went through the same process as Cody, trusting the same data. He fired. The result was the same. A bullet sent on a journey to nowhere. He fired again. Another ghost. The SOCOM procurement officers were beginning to look at their watches. One of them, a lean colonel with the patient eyes of a predator, made a note on a pad. The gesture was small, but it felt like a verdict. The day was becoming a failure. A very expensive failure. Brandt was sweating now, his crisp shirt showing dark patches under the arms. He was losing the room. His product, his commission, his reputation, all of it was vanishing into the shimmering heat along with the bullets. In a desperate theatrical move born of pure frustration, he spun around and pointed at the old man on the cooler. "You know what? Fine," he announced to the group, his voice strained. "Our friend here, the agronomist, seems to have it all figured out. Why don't we let him have a go? Show us all how it's done, old man. Come on, put your money where your mouth is." The invitation was a joke, an act of public ridicule meant to deflect from his own failure. The contractors chuckled, expecting the old man to stammer an excuse, to shrink back into his quiet corner. But he didn't. He looked at Brandt, his gaze flat and unreadable. He took one last slow sip from his thermos cup, then screwed it carefully back onto the thermos. He placed the thermos on the ground with a soft, metallic click. The sound was unnervingly deliberate. Then, with a quiet grunt, he pushed himself to his feet. The movement was what caught Cody's full attention for the first time. There was no wasted motion. An economy born not of age or weakness, but of profound efficiency. He rose not like an old farmer with stiff joints, but like a man who had gotten up from the ground thousands of times in places where moving quickly and quietly was the only way to keep breathing. He walked towards the firing line. He didn't have a rifle with him. He stopped and looked down at the Ethelred, this pinnacle of modern weapon engineering lying on the mat. Then he looked back towards his cooler. "Got my own," he said, and walked back to retrieve it. From behind his cooler, he produced a long canvas-wrapped bundle. It was stained and worn, secured with simple leather straps. As he unrolled it, the other shooters began to murmur, then to laugh openly. Inside was a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum, a Winchester Model 70 pre-1964 with a heavy barrel and a stock of dark oiled walnut. The wood was scarred and dented, worn smooth in the places where a man's hands and cheek would rest. The scope was a unnoticed, long and external, with adjustment mounts that looked positively ancient. It was the kind of rifle Carlos Hathcock had used in Vietnam. "Jesus Christ," Jansen muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is he going to shoot a deer?" Brandt's mocking smile returned, wider than before. This was perfect. The old man's failure would be so complete, so comical, that it would erase the memory of the Ethelred's own shortcomings. "By all means," he said with a grand, sweeping gesture. "The floor is yours." The old man, Arthur, laid the canvas on the ground and then placed his rifle on it. He didn't lie down right away. He stood for a long moment, looking downrange, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. He pulled a single weathered cartridge from his shirt pocket. It was a .30-06 Springfield, a round that was a centenarian. He didn't have a fancy box of ammunition, just one bullet. Cody watched, his skepticism warring with a strange, rising sense of anticipation. Everything the man did was precise. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't performing. He was working. Arthur finally settled onto the ground behind the rifle, his body conforming to the earth with a practiced ease. His movements were fluid, minimal. Cody, who had spent years perfecting the art of a stable shooting position, recognized the technique instantly. It was a masterclass in stillness. The man became part of the landscape. He didn't ask for a spotter. He didn't consult the Kestrel or the ballistic computer. He pulled a small dog-eared notebook from his back pocket, the kind with a spiral binding at the top, and a stub of a pencil. He licked the tip of the pencil and made a small notation. He squinted through his scope, not for long, just a few seconds. He seemed to be looking not at the target, but at the mirage itself, reading the direction and speed of the waves of heat. He plucked a single blade of dry grass from beside his mat, held it up, and watched it drift to the ground. Then he reached for his scope. The clicks of the adjustment knobs were loud in the sudden silence. He spun the elevation turret. A lot, more than Cody would have thought possible. Then he adjusted the windage knob. He clicked it far to the right, far more than the 7 to 9 mph wind would suggest. To Cody, watching over his shoulder, the hold looked completely wrong. He was aiming at a point that seemed to be dozens of feet to the right of the target. It made no logical mathematical sense. Brandt leaned in towards one of the SOCOM officers. "He's aiming at the next county over," he whispered, a smirk in his voice. The old man ignored them all. He settled his cheek against the worn wood of the stock. He took in a breath, let half of it out. His finger rested on the trigger. The world seemed to slow down. Cody found himself holding his own breath. The silence on the range was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind. For a full 10 seconds, nothing happened. The man was utterly motionless, his eye fused to the scope, his body to the earth. He was waiting. Cody knew what he was waiting for. A lull, a specific moment in the wind's chaotic rhythm, a seam in the world that only a man who had spent a lifetime watching could perceive. Then, the rifle fired. The sound was different from the Ethelred's sharp technological bark. It was a deep, resonant boom, a more organic and powerful sound that spoke of powder and pressure in a much more fundamental way. It was the voice of an older, less forgiving kind of power. The old man didn't move. He kept his eye on the scope, his body perfectly still, watching the vapor trail of his own bullet, a skill known as calling his shot. On the monitor, the 7 seconds passed in profound silence. No one breathed. The image of the distant steel plate shimmering in the heat was perfectly still. And then, it happened. Ping. A tiny black dot appeared, dead center on the plate. A perfect bullseye. It was followed a fraction of a second later by the faint metallic ring of the impact. a sound that had traveled 4,000 meters to reach them. The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was not empty, it was filled with shock, with disbelief, with the sudden violent recalibration of reality. Brandt's mouth was hanging open. Jansen and the other contractors were staring at the monitor, then at the old man's rifle, then back at the monitor, as if they couldn't reconcile the two. The engineer with the tablet was looking at his data, his face a mask of utter confusion. The numbers said it was impossible. The monitor said it had happened. Cody felt a cold chill run down his spine, despite the blistering heat. It wasn't a lucky shot. Luck doesn't land dead center from 2.5 miles away. It was a shot that defied the laws of modern ballistics. It was a shot that came from a different kind of knowledge. The man hadn't beaten the technology. He had simply ignored it, relying on something older, deeper. That ridiculous comment, "the ground's thirsty," suddenly felt like a profound scientific principle he had never been taught. He had compensated for a variable that wasn't in any of their computers, the way the superheated ground created a thermal downdraft, pulling the bullet down faster than gravity alone would account for. And the wind. He must have been holding for a complex, multi-layered wind shear, reading the different speeds and directions in the mirage. It was an act of intuitive genius that bordered on the supernatural. The old man worked the bolt, ejecting the single, smoking brass casing. It landed softly in the dust. He didn't look at the monitor. He didn't look at the stunned faces around him. He already knew where the shot had gone. He began to pack his rifle, rolling it carefully back into its worn canvas sleeve, his movements just as deliberate and unhurried as before. The show was over. Just as he was fastening the last leather strap, the sound of a vehicle approaching made everyone turn. A black government SUV was coming up the dirt road, kicking up a plume of dust. It parked near the firing line, and a man in his late 60s got out. He wore civilian clothes, a simple polo shirt and slacks, but he carried himself with an unmistakable authority. His hair was silver, his posture ramrod straight. It was General Pace, a legendary figure in the special operations community, now retired but still a powerful voice in procurement and strategy. He was the man they had all been waiting for. Pace surveyed the scene. The high-tech rifles, the corporate suits, the collection of shooters, and the old man quietly packing his gear. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept across the group and then landed on the old man. And he stopped. The general's entire demeanor shifted. The look of a senior officer inspecting a field demonstration vanished, replaced by something else entirely. It was a look of profound, unguarded recognition. And something more. Reverence. He walked past Brandt, who had snapped to attention. He walked past the SOCOM colonel. He walked straight to the old man, who was now standing up, his canvas-wrapped rifle in his hand. "Arthur," the general said. His voice was quiet, almost personal. The old man, Arthur, simply nodded. "General?" Pace stood there for a moment, looking at the old rifle. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Still using that old thing, I see." "It works," Arthur said. Pace turned to face the stunned, silent group. His eyes found Cody, then the colonel, then Brandt. He seemed to understand in an instant what had transpired here. "For those of you who don't know," General Pace said, his voice now carrying the weight of command, "this is Arthur Croft. And you've probably never heard of him, because most of the work he did, officially, never happened." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. In the 1970s, when the rest of the world thought a 1,000-meter shot was the limit of possibility, Arthur and his spotter were working on a program out here in this same desert. No computers, no laser rangefinders, just a scope like that one, a pencil, and an understanding of the natural world that no one has ever replicated. They wrote the book on extreme long-range engagement. "No, that's not right," the general corrected himself. "They didn't write the book. They are the book. Every ballistic table you use, every formula in those computers for calculating Coriolis drift and density altitude. It's all built on the data they gathered by hand, in conditions you boys wouldn't last a day in. They were making 2-mile shots when your fancy systems were just a theory in a lab." He gestured towards the ethelred on the mat. "You spend millions of dollars trying to build a machine that can do what he can do with a piece of wood and steel. You build a computer to see the world. He just sees it. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The quiet old farmer, the man they had mocked and dismissed, he wasn't just a veteran. He was a foundational pillar of their entire profession, a ghost from the pages of their own history, standing right there in a faded flannel shirt. Cody looked at Arthur Croft and he felt a profound sense of shame, followed by an overwhelming wave of awe. He finally understood. The economy of motion, the quiet patience, the unnerving stillness. It was the language of a man who had spent more time behind a rifle, in absolute solitude, than most people spend in their own homes. He hadn't been watching them shoot. He had been watching them fail to understand the very world they were trying to conquer. Brant, his face pale, stumbled forward. "Mr. Croft, sir, I had no idea. My apologies. What you did, it was incredible. We at Ethelred Systems would be honored. Perhaps a consulting position. We could learn so much." His voice trailed off as Arthur turned his pale blue eyes on him. Arthur didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked through him, as if Brant were a pane of glass, a minor distortion in the air. The salesman, with all his bluster and confidence, simply ceased to exist in Arthur Croft's world. Arthur turned back to the general. "Good seeing you, Robert," he said. "You too, Arthur. You shouldn't have had to do that," Pace replied, his voice low. "They weren't listening to the wind," Arthur said, as if that explained everything, and to him it probably did. He gave a final nod and started walking towards a dusty, dented Ford F-150 parked at the edge of the lot, a truck that looked as old and reliable as his rifle. No one said a word. They just watched him go. The man who had just redefined the possible was leaving without a single backward glance. Cody found his legs moving before he consciously decided to. He had to ask. He jogged to catch up, stopping a respectful distance from the truck's open door. "Sir," he said. He had to clear his throat. "Mr. Croft." "I'm Chief Evans." Arthur paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked at Cody, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly. He wasn't looking at a SEAL or a shooter. He was looking at a fellow practitioner of a lonely, demanding art. "Sir, how?" Cody asked, gesturing vaguely back toward the distant target. "How did you know? The hold. It didn't make any sense by the numbers." Arthur looked out over the desert again, his gaze distant. "The numbers are a map," he said, his voice quiet. "They're a good map, but they're not the territory. The tech tells you what should be happening according to the rules. The world tells you what is happening right now in this one spot at this 1 second, and it's always breaking the rules." He looked at Cody's own rifle, the Ethelred, lying abandoned on the mat. "That's a fine piece of equipment. It'll get you close, but the last 1%, the part that matters, that's not in the machine. It's in here." He tapped his temple gently. "You have to learn how to listen, not just with your ears. You listen with your eyes, with your skin. You feel the heat coming off the ground. You watch the way the birds are flying. It's all talking to you. It's all one big story." He opened the truck door, the hinges groaning in protest. He tossed the canvas-wrapped rifle onto the passenger seat as if it were a bag of groceries. "You're a good shooter, son," Arthur said, looking Cody in the eye. "You're steady. You just gotta stop letting the machine do all your thinking for you." With that, he slid into the driver's seat. The engine turned over with a rough, healthy roar. He put the truck in gear and pulled away, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and a silence that was now filled with a new and humbling kind of knowledge. Cody stood there, watching the old truck disappear down the long dirt road until it was just another shimmer in the heat. He turned and walked back to the firing line. The group was still standing there, motionless like statues. General Pace was staring after the truck, a look of deep respect on his face. Brant was staring at the ground, his entire sales pitch, his entire worldview shattered. Cody walked over to the Ethelred X11, the rifle that cost $250,000 and was supposed to be the future of warfare. He looked at its sleek carbon fiber lines, its glowing digital displays, its array of sensors. It looked inert, soulless, a complicated and expensive toy. He looked back out at the 4,000-meter target. The tiny black hole in the center was a testament. A period at the end of a sentence he was only just beginning to understand. The heat was still a liar. The wind was still a whisper. But for the first time all day, he felt like he was starting to learn the language. He reached down and plucked a blade of grass. It was dry and brittle, and he held it up and let it go, watching the way it fell.